Hi, my name is Betsy Burns, and I'm a Quality Enhancement Specialist for CQL. First of all, I'd like to welcome you all today to the webinar, and thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. I welcome to Ann Beekner, who is also a Quality Enhancement Specialist for CQL. Ann and I are actually listed as facilitators for today's webinar, and I want to take this time to thank Ann for taking the lead in coordinating this. Thanks a lot, Ann. Welcome to our panelists, Catherine Dunbar and Joseph Macbeth, for taking your time to be here with us today. Kate Dunbar is the Director of Accreditation for CQL and oversees all aspects of accreditation processes from development to delivery. And Joe Macbeth is Executive Director at the National Alliance for Direct Support Professional, and he's worked in the field of intellectual and developmental disabilities for 35 years, beginning as a direct support professional. He currently sits on CQL's Board of Directors, as well as many other boards, I think. Okay, today's agenda will include the following. Both Ann and I are doing a refresher on 2017 Personal Outcome Measures Manual. And you will note that although Ann and I do a lot of training, some of our slides are a little different. So we appreciate different learning styles. So give us your feedback on what visually works best for all of you. We'll be covering 4 indicators that include people live in integrated environments, people use their environments, people experience continuity and security, and people choose where and with whom to live. And we will be referencing pages of the 2017 Personal Outcomes Measures Manual. So I'd encourage you to have your manuals available to look at as we cover the 4 indicators. After Ann and I are finished, Kate Dunbar will speak about protection from abuse and neglect. And then when Kate's finished, Joe Macbeth will speak about direct support professionals, workforce development. And last, we'll do our very best to answer any questions you may have at the end of the webinar, or at the very least follow up via email. Okay, Steph, that would be great. I think I should get started with people live in integrated environments. Go ahead and advance. Oh, wonderful. So first, what I did is, and Ann did a similar thing too, is we put things out there for things to think about. They're not in order of anything. We just picked some topics we thought were really important to revisit in this first webinar. So things to think about. If you go to page 42 of your manual, and remember from your personal outcome measures training, oops, I'm on the wrong thing, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Living in the community, becoming part of the world around us, part of the life in the community, obtain social capital. These are key words that I put in here for you to think about. If you go to page 42, you think about values. Integration increases exposure to and acceptance of a wide diversity of people. Building, that word social capital again, is increased when people live within their community. Remember when you think about physical integration, it's not really the same as social integration. Although it can lead to greater social inclusion, physical integration requires that people are physically present in their community. And integration increases exposure to and acceptance of a wide diversity of people, including social capital. It's increased when people live within their community. And remember, think about principles for organizations. People spend time in their environments. They prefer an array of options. Word social capital again. Ensure that environments where people spend their time are determined by their preferences. These are just salient points that I've included from the manual and should be thought about when you're looking at the process of decision making for the presence of outcome of the person and the presence of individualized supports. Okay, go ahead and advance. Thank you. Okay, this is really looking at, it's page 44, and the people that know me, that have done training with me or done reliability with me, I'm always referencing the manual. And this is where I had my slide mixed up here. So this is salient points again. Outcome questions to support questions. Refer to page 44. And remember from your personal outcome measures training, the alphabet and acronyms, the 3 E's, education, experience, and exposure. Big thing to think about, you see under outcome questions. Does the person use the same environments? And the keywords inform personal choice. Think about how can someone make informed choices about their preferences when they haven't had education, experience, or exposure. And then in thinking about support, does the organization know our efforts being made? And what about the person's preferences? This again goes back to the 3 E's. Do services and supports promote opportunities for integration for living, work, school, community? And that includes leisure activities, shopping, banking, places of worship, or other things that the person wants to do. So the 3 E's are always thought about when you're doing decision making, when you're thinking about people living in integrated environments. And it does include all environments. Thank you, Seth. You can advance, that would be great. Okay, in this area for things to think about, we're looking at page 39. I'm thinking in my head, I hear flipping of pages as you go through your manual. So again, some salient points. In terms of the environment where people live, work, spend time, do they have full access and use? Do they have specialized training or adaptation for things that they need? You know, people increase the use of their environments when they have opportunities for a variety of experience. There's the 3 E's again. People need to feel comfortable to control their environment, have supports. Environment, technology, computer advancements, they make dramatic change in the control people have over environments, as well as environmental modifications increase people's control and independence. Ramps, grab bars, vibrating alarm systems, mobile apps, voice-activated device, think, Alexa, Sirius, or maybe Google. And then you think on page 39 again, values for the person. People are not limited by regulatory or environmental barriers. Do modification adaptations increase independence? Those are things we need to be thinking about if we're doing enough of that. For principles for the organization, we're looking again on page 39, assess the need for people to modify, adapt, train to meet needs so that people have more control and capacity. We want to ensure rules and practices. Or is there any lack of training? Do we need modifications? We need to adapt something. We don't want to limit any or all environments. We want to look at, are we locking laundry room doors? Where do we locate our staff offices? Where do we have telephones? Is staff telephones, are they all in people's homes? Are there areas designated as an area that is a common room for people, but then there's a locked fridge in that room because it's for staff? Think about those things. Think about creating rules, for example, when people use the kitchen. Okay, the next slide, Seth, thank you. And this is pretty straightforward. These decision-making questions really didn't change hardly at all from the last manual. In fact, most of them didn't change much. They just included more specific information in them. For decision-making, we want to look at outcomes and support questions that you'll see on page 41. And remember, when you're having your conversations and your interviews, you're really looking to figure out what kind of questions am I going to ask so that I can get to these decision-making questions. So for outcomes, does a person have maximum access to each environment? What limits or barriers to their access? Do people use the environments they frequent, and do they have informed consent? And you can look at the 3 E's there as well. And if you ask, organizations need to know, have you assessed interest and personal ability in all or any environments? Have modifications been made to promote maximum access? So just some thoughts to think about when you're making decisions around environments. And we chose integrated environments, and people use their environments because they really go hand in hand and support each other, as often a lot of the personal outcome measures indicators do. So we can advance the slide, and Anne can start with people experience continuity and security.
Thank you, Betsy.
You're welcome.
This is Anne here. Thank you. Couple of the outcomes that we're going to be addressing, from at least that are being looked at on my portion today, there are significant differences with regard to some of the specific decision-making questions that are now in the 2017 manual. So the two that I'm going to be talking with us about, experiencing continuity and security, and then later choosing where and with whom to live. there are some things that I do want to point out, and it's just been my experience recently that trainers and interviewers who've been certified under the previous version of this manual still are getting their kind of feet wet with some of those things. So I did want to point some of those things out to us, just so that we keep that on our radar and are familiar enough with where we're heading with our decision making, so that we have adequate and full information. The values for this outcome, as I'm certain you all are aware as certified folks, just to put a kind of frame around this, is that we know this is really about change, and certainly understanding that, you know, change occurs in all of our lives. Some of those changes we have control over, of course. Others, yes, we have control over, as well as included in this outcome being the sense of financial, economic stability. It's vital for us to remember that people must be included and involved in any decisions that impact changes in their lives. And this is one of the things in the 2017 decision-making page, and that's on page 27 of your note, is there are some specific things that guide us through our matrix there. There's additional information in those decision-making questions to prompt us, first in our conversation with people, and then secondly, when we're putting that information into the decision-making matrices or questions. Advance, please. For the specific things that I do want to talk about for this outcome of experiencing continuity and security in your manual actually help us to guide our information gathering. And I do want to point out for you on that page, decision making 4.3 includes a lot of the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about, and changes having occurred either in the past 2 years and similar things being anticipated, or knowing that things are coming down the pike in the next upcoming 2 years. So similar to both those past 2 years, forward 2 years, we're looking at changes in people's where they live, change in house or roommate, employer or employment, things that people do during their day, relationships, changes in guardian, changes in natural support networks, changes in provider organization, including change in direct support staff, financial resource changes, and other changes that would be important to the person, which of course you're going to get to as you're having that conversation. So based on those things, then you're able to, in the final decision-making exclamation point, it asks us to gather all that information that is pertinent to that person's life, and then make that decision, stressing in that final decision-making question that either these changes had no impact on the person, it was due to an informed personal choice, the person was involved in that, and or it was planned for to minimize disruption. So those are some of the more specific changes that either you as interviewers or trainers can certainly help to kind of ramp up your information gathering, as you know you're going to be needing to plug that information into the decision making. Advance, Seth, please. For organizational reminders, again, I think if you're familiar with the manual, these values and principles for what we do organizationally hasn't changed, but the concept here is kind of in the crux of this is supports know what's important for the person with regard to change, how he or she responds to, needs to be prepared for, that changes plan to minimize disruption, and that people are supported to either build or maintain continuity and security, going back to all of those components that we've just addressed in how that outcome is defined, with all of those different facets of that. Advance, please. And that's, again, Seth, thank you. You were kind to pull up a screenshot. For those of you who are using CQL's portal, what I just wanted to highlight for you here is that in your processing through placing in the information into CQL's data portal system, it actually is going to sort of drive you to ask these questions of yourself. So for example, the one that's up here on in front of you, question number 84, if there was a change, who is primarily responsible for that? And in this instance, it was for a change of residence. So this also helps to drive you as you're gathering information, that it would be good to know who was responsible, how did that come about, and then there's more of the portal pages as you are moving through that system that will ask you other specific questions. So I just wanted to put this all in a nutshell for you, so you see from the information gathering through the data determinations on outcomes and supports, and then as it moves into the formal data system that we have, it all kind of comes into play and is pretty nice and tight. And you can reference back to, as Betsy said, you've got all that information in your manual. The next outcome, thank you, Seth, if you could advance, is the outcome of people choosing where and with whom to live. Again, this one was selected because there were a few differences that were from the old manual to the 2017 manual. Nothing changed about people having an array of options, the same array of options available to anybody else in that community. But the second to the bottom bullet on the page here is options do need to include non-disability specific generic settings. So that sort of speaks for itself, and it actually goes to decision making question 17.2, which is found on page 70 of your manual, that specifically asks, do these options that we're talking about for people and where they're living and who they're living with, do they include generic community settings with the possibility of a private room or home? So just so that you're aware, in this new manual, that is a specific decision-making question that will inform how you make the determination of if it's fully robustly present or not for the person. Next slide, please. Principles for the organization. Again, I think you all are aware of this. We wrap ourselves around this, that we're discovering what people's preferences are through, as Betsy said, through the 3 E's. We advocate, and advocacy can take on varying different levels. It can be for people individually, it can be organizational advocacy, can be system advocacy, which we are doing based on people's personal characteristics and their preferences. Advance, please. Again, for the decision-making matrix here, I put up the portal page where, and again, thank you, Seth, where you'll see that it follows the manual's decision-making matrix. You'll see that on this slide, which is, Seth helped me with a screenshot, questions number 319 and 320 actually beg of us to answer these questions. Do options include those generic non-disability specific settings? And then it even breaks it down. Private room in a residential setting, do they respect the person's choice? So as you are putting this into portal, if that's something you and your agency do, just so that you know, it all fits very tightly back into what you've been doing in your information gathering and in your decision making for outcomes and supports. So for those of you who are getting more familiar with your 2017 manual, if there's other things that are coming up, and you know, I know we within CQL we touch base with you every so often, but if it's not when that's scheduled for, you know, you're always welcome to be in touch with us. As a little teaser, I just want to point out that for additional personal outcome measure discussion, Michael Clausen, one of our CQL colleagues, is going to be hosting a webinar later this month on gray areas and difficult answers on May 31st. So if you're looking at our webinar offerings, please feel free to join us for that. And with that said, now I'm going to introduce again Kate Dunmar, our CQL Director of Accreditation. She's going to speak to us today about some of the findings from a recent U.S. Office of Inspector General report on abuse and neglect. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, everyone. So we only have a very short amount of time to discuss this, so I'm going to talk about it pretty quickly. But this was an audit that was conducted by the Office of Inspector General, and then they began collaboration with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Administration for Community Living, and the Office of Civil Rights. So it was a partnership among those federal agencies. And what they did is that they looked at 3 different states, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Maine, and they drew some conclusions about abuse and neglect and people who live in group homes that are at risk of serious harm. And as we know from the media lately, I mean, NPR did a big series on this, and there's also been lots of other coverage in various states. Newspapers, I know here in Illinois, the Chicago Trib has done quite a few things, quite a few stories around abuse and neglect, as has New York and some other states. So these are not isolated incidents. And what OIG did is they reviewed data, interviewed people, used quite a bit of expertise, and looked at the data and the incident management from multiple perspectives. And so once they did this, they started developing model practices that provide states some direction on how to handle incident management. So unfortunately, for those of us who've been in the disabilities field for quite some time, we do know that there are issues with abuse and neglect. And, you know, I do believe that agencies, for the most part, do try very diligently to ensure these things don't happen. So it does occur in 49 of our 50 states. I do not know which state didn't have issues. That was not available in the information that I saw. By the way, the name of this report is Ensuring Beneficiary Health and Safety in Group Homes Through State Implementation of Comprehensive Compliance Oversight. So we would, if anybody wants this report, we would, instead of digging for it, we'd be happy to share it with you. It is, for people who like this kind of thing, it's a good report to read. I found it quite intriguing, actually. But, you know, states and agencies have a lot of work to do. So Seth, if you could advance the slide. So what OIG found is that states just simply weren't complying with the federal requirements for reporting. And they found that, you know, agencies and states failed to ensure that group homes reported all critical incidents. And these are things such as second-degree burns, broken bones, you know, other serious injuries, and even up to deaths weren't being reported by the states. They also found that even when an incident was reported by the agency to the states weren't necessarily properly documenting those incidents. And then states did not ensure that reported incidents were reported at the correct severity level. Depending on your state, you know, there could be level 1, level 2, or level 3, you know, however it goes, but agencies weren't weren't reporting those incidents according to the right severity level. In some instances, agencies downplayed the severity of the incident. You know, they may have, when there was a broken bone, they may have just reported a sprain or, you know, something like that. They also failed to ensure that data was reviewed and that reasonable suspicion of abuse and neglect were not properly reported. So here in a few minutes, you know, we'll go over very briefly the factor of abuse and neglect, the basic assurances factor of prevention of abuse and neglect, and how how the indicators and probes align with this report, and if agencies and states did all of these things that are under those basic assurances under protection from abuse and neglect, people would be, in a much better place. Next slide, please. So these three agencies compiled a team of different people with different expertise, and they came up with some suggestions and recommendations for states to implement. And they really focused on state compliance with oversight practices, and then actions that CMS can take to support states when systemic and serious health issues arise. So what they would like to see are really reliable incident management and investigation processes. It's important for the information that you're gathering quite clearly to be reliable. You want to make sure you have that information, and that the audit protocols really ensure compliance with the different components of an investigation, from reporting to response. And then effective mortality reviews of unexpected deaths. I think quite often in many states, the state actually will conduct investigations into unexpected deaths, but I don't know that, or OIG has found that they're really not doing effective mortality reviews of those unexpected deaths. And then that quality assurance mechanisms really ensure the delivery and integrity of appropriate community-based services. Next slide, please, Seth. So I'm just pulling out just a few things from the model practices that I thought people might be interested in. And the audit expectations from, for an incident management office, they really want to ensure that there's accountable incident reporting and external notifications of serious events, or serious incidents. They want to make sure that incident reports are filed as soon as possible, but at least within 24 hours. That the incident reports really provide a detailed description of the provider's immediate response, and that if necessary, incident reports also show that law enforcement was notified if there was an incident that could be associated with a criminal act, and that was done as soon as possible. There are many other things under that the state recommends, or that OIG recommends, but we don't have time to go through all of those. As far as the individual incident review, they really want some accountability for meeting minutes of the incident management committees, and that they want to ensure that committees are meeting as frequently as needed to ensure that they're reviewing incidents in a timely manner, that they also show that there is timely and thorough reviews of those incidents. So ensuring that the committee has all the information to review those and to track and trend those, and that they explicitly accept or reject the recommended corrective actions for those incidents. For the incident investigation itself, they want to ensure that incident investigations are timely, comprehensive, and non-partial. And I know that some agencies that we've worked with struggle a little bit for this non-partial investigation. We really want to ensure that there's, an arm's length when someone is investigating, when someone internal is investigating an incident. And that way it's a more objective review, and you can learn more through that investigation and take better steps to support people and mitigate incidents. They also want to ensure that the investigations are comprehensive so that everybody is interviewed who needs to be interviewed, and that the investigations are prompt and thorough. Another recommendation or expectation is that there's a timely implementation of the corrective actions. So if something happens that that corrective action occurs very timely, they define that as soon as possible and within 30 days in all cases. So if there's something that happens, the corrective action should take place within 30 days. And then an informative systemic review of incidents to identify, address, and respond to trends and patterns. And this is something that is very critical, especially for the prevention piece. If you see a trend where there's been a lot of incidents with a particular person, then perhaps there's some medical intervention that's needed, or some sort of root cause analysis for those types of incidents. Or if there's incidents that tend to cluster when a certain staff is working or during a certain time of day, that deserves some deeper digging into those incidents to try to mitigate any effects that incident may have. Next slide, please. So the OIG also has some recommended practices for the essential components of state incident management investigations. They want to ensure that the proper reporting and notification is completed. And that's really about holding mandated reporters accountable and ensuring that the documentation in that report is thorough and accurate. They want to focus on that and that things are, reported properly. They have a list of about 20 different things that should be reported via an incident report system. Most of those things that you already assume, such as death, allegations of any type of abuse or neglect, exploitation, when people leave their home or place of service without letting anyone else know, exploitation, things like that, property damage, those types of things. So really kind of laying out and spelling out what agencies should be reporting to states. As far as the investigation, as far as the incident review goes, it's really ensuring that agencies and states are conducting, investigations that are thorough and prompt. And they lay out many criteria for incident management review committees to ensure that there's comprehensive reviews of incidents and investigation findings, and that they're meeting frequently, the things we've kind of already talked about a little bit. As far as the investigation piece goes, they make some recommendations around when states should actually conduct an investigation, an independent investigation. So anything around physical or emotional abuse that has resulted in serious or repeated harm, any allegation of sexual abuse, any allegation of financial exploitation that's over $250, unexpected or deaths that appear unnatural. There's a whole list of things that OIG is recommending states investigate independently, or by by a different entity, maybe a contracted entity, to ensure that those investigations are thoroughly completed. And that this I think a lot of people will find intriguing. OIG is recommending that incident investigations involving allegations of physical abuse and neglect that result in death or potentially life-threatening or serious injury or illness should be completed within 14 days. I think many of us would appreciate if an investigation was completed that timely. I know in some states that certainly does not happen. I know living in Illinois and being on the provider side in Illinois, that certainly does not happen. So hopefully these recommendations will help states move toward that. For corrective action recommendations and implementation, that's really just ensuring that trend analysis occurs and that, they're really looking at the corrective action and ensuring that it's implemented. Next slide, please. So they're also recommending some model practices for state quality assurance. And what I really wanted to emphasize with this slide is that is really the piece around that's highlighted there, the oversight of individualized service planning and delivery. I think the person-centered plan is a very important document for people, as I'm sure we all share that opinion. But it's making sure that there are certain pieces that are really important to that plan. So they want to ensure that it's person-centered, that that has individualized and relevant goals. I thought that was interesting that OIG came up with that. I think that's a good plan. And then appropriate service recommendations, and then practical interventions. And that the most interesting one is that there's they want to include random on-site audits of people receiving services for people in the waiver. I know that some states already do that already. I think OIG is recommending that all states do that. So next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So these are the basic assurances indicators for protection from abuse, neglect, mistreatment, exploitation. And if you have a basic assurances manual and you read the probes under some of these indicators, I think that you will agree that the basic assurances really do align with the recommendations from this report. We're not going to get into an in-depth review of how they align. We're not going to crosswalk it. I just wanted to draw your attention to it. Next slide, please. So we have a bit of data, and Seth, we may go through these fairly quickly just so I can keep an eye on time and make sure Joe has enough time for his presentation. So next slide, please. So for this slide, we really want to talk about how people understand the meaning of abuse and neglect. So the top right slides ask questions around abuse, neglect, exploitation, and mistreatment. And as you can see, almost 20% have allegations of abuse, while about only 5% have allegations of neglect, exploitation, or mistreatment. So, think about how often this goes, allegations go unreported or uninvestigated. Next slide, please. So almost all allegations have evidence, which was actually very startling to me. I didn't realize that almost all allegations had evidence until Carly pulled this data. And if you look at the top left-hand corner, notice that about 20% of organizations don't provide support even when there are concerns regarding abuse, neglect, exploitation, and mistreatment That's pretty awful. Or the bottom left, that they don't even investigate 12% of the allegations, even though we've already shown that the allegations are likely true. Even the top right, where 5% of people are not provided with support when they're in danger or there is a risk of harm. That number should really be 0, not 5%. So as a result, only 64% of people have the support in place. For those who don't have the support, most of the organizations don't even have plans, or they aren't even aware that these items are in place. This is concerning, especially given safety is considered one of the basic forms of accountability. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that talks about the probability of being free from abuse or neglect. So in terms of who is most or least likely to experience abuse neglect, you might assume people with more complex disabilities or alternative communication methods are at higher risk. That's certainly mirrored in research, but actually what we found was that there were no significant differences in likelihood to have outcomes present across disability types, communication methods, guardianship, daily support needs, or complex needs. These trends were very similar with supports in place as well. What was significant was the number of roommates with disabilities that they had. As the resident size, although not type, goes up, people are less and less likely to have the outcome for being free from abuse or neglect present. So people with disabilities in larger settings are at greater risk for not even having some of the basics like freedom from abuse and neglect in place. Next slide, please. So this slide shows when free from abuse and neglect organizational support's in place, people with disabilities are 9.1 times more likely to have the free from abuse and neglect outcome present. So again, if you would like a copy of the full report, please let us know and we'll be sure to get that to you. I'm going to turn this over to Joe Macbeth. Thank you, Seth.
Thanks. Thank you, Kate. And good afternoon,
Sure.
everybody. And before I begin, I want to thank CQL for inviting me back. We did this about 2 months ago, and my internet kept on cutting out on me, and I left the audience probably on 3 or 4 different occasions. So hopefully that won't happen today. It's my pleasure to join you today. I have no script, and you don't need a manual. I'm probably going to share with you everything you already know, but I connect to these types of discussions back to outcomes. So Seth, if you could move to the next slide, a little bit about who we are. We're a national organization. Our founder was John F. Kennedy Jr. We were founded in 1996, and John passed away in 1999, and we spent the next 11 years or so housed at the University of Minnesota's Research and Training Center. And while we were there for those 11 years, we created 3 major things, contributions to the IDD field: the NADSP's Code of Ethics, the NADSP competency areas, and a national credentialing program. And over the years, we have we've expanded on those 3 major products. We've refined them, and we continue to grow. This year, we are visiting probably about 35 states and working with different organizations in different capacities. And we're largely we're an advocacy organization. We are certainly a training organization, and we are very involved with public policy and getting direct support professionals the recognition and the compensation and the value that is commensurate to their work in this field, which has largely gone unnoticed. We talk about it a lot, but we've never really done anything. So next slide, please. Where's quality defined? And I've been around a long time, as Betsy mentioned, 35 years. It's hard to believe that I've been around this long. I entered the field probably like many of you. I was looking for a job to move out of my parents' house, and I found a job and I loved it. And over time, I became relatively good at it. Quality is a funny thing, and one of the reasons why NADSP and CQL, we share many values, I believe, and we at NADSP believe that quality is defined at the point of interaction between the staff person and the person with a disability, and that comes from our founder. And that was said in 1995, and I think it's the first time somebody really made that connection. And he did talk about when John was President Clinton's chair of the PCPID in 1995, a report was written, and each year that report has a different theme. In 1995, the theme was on the workforce crisis. And John shared many, and that committee shared many recommendations, and some of which have been implemented, like the creation of the NADSP. But when you think about quality being defined at the point of interaction, I know, and all of you know, that outcomes, people with disabilities are achieving great things in 2018. People with disabilities are getting married and buying their own homes and getting jobs in the community and are thriving and are being more valued in the community and safer than ever before. And that doesn't happen by magic. I see these outcomes and I look underneath them. I dig deeper, and in those outcomes, you see direct support professionals who are helping people achieve those outcomes. You see skills, you see ethics, you see highly dignified, a highly skilled, a multidisciplinary practitioner supporting people to achieve things that are important to them. And often they do these things unspectacularly. They do these things quietly. Direct support professionals, there's 1.2 million of them in the United States today. And I'll get into some data later. So we know that outcomes happen because in many cases, really good direct support professionals. Next slide, Seth. And as Kate mentioned, the opposite of that, of course, is abuse and neglect. And I just took two of relatively recent news articles, Joe Shapiro's NPR series, which was fascinating and devastating at the same time, and Ronnie Poloneski, a 4-part series in the Philadelphia Inquirer called Falling Off the Cliff. And by the way, if anybody's coming to the Reinventing Quality Conference this summer in Baltimore, I'm going to be facilitating a panel with both Joe Shapiro and Ronnie Poloneski to talk about this. So this is the opposite. We know abuse and neglect, unfortunately, happens at that point of interaction. And we also know that our field will attract predators. We don't have a good public perception that this is very challenging and very comprehensive and complex work. People can come and abuse people, and we need to stop that before we even hire them. So I'll get into that later. Next slide, please. If you want to get to quality, especially, and actually I speak a lot about direct support professionals, but I would expand this to frontline supervisors and any management position in your organization. If you want quality to happen, you need 3 things: knowledge, skills, and values. And the knowledge is the training that your direct support professionals are receiving. Are they receiving training based on sound research? Is it based on evidence? Is it the latest thing? Or is it something that's antiquated that we've always taught at Agency B, and this is how we do things, and this is how we teach because this is aligned with our mission? Well, you know what? Direct support work is universal work. And these skills, which is the next piece, the skills, are universal. They've been validated. And that is basically taking the knowledge and applying it on the job. And that can be measured by supervisors who understand the NADSP competency areas. The third thing is values, and that's the code of ethics. And our code of ethics is not just for direct support professionals. Our code of ethics is for everybody, from board members to executives to clinicians to management staff to direct support professionals to bus drivers to anybody. You need to understand the code of ethics, because it is easy to impose what we believe to be right or wrong onto others. And it happens all the time. So if you're not familiar with the code of ethics, please go to our website, download it, print it out, share it, think about it, contact us if you want more information. But I do believe you need to have all three of those things. You can't have just two or one. Knowledge, skills, and values for direct support professionals to really understand the significance of their work. Next slide, please. Now, this is a busy slide. So this is basically proving to you all that direct support is truly a profession. Many people have historically seen direct support as an entry-level job to get your foot in the door and to get promoted out of it. And that is one of the reasons why we have such challenges in keeping good direct support professionals, because they're trying to get paid more to be promoted. Well, I think we should pay the good ones to stay. And that's what career ladders are. So every profession shares 5 things: a dynamic body of knowledge. That's science. That's research. That's growth. That's something that is very up to date. You know, when I was in high school, the body of knowledge of the day regarding autism was that autism was caused by mothers, refrigerator mothers. Look it up. It's Dr. Bruno Bettelheim and Leo Connor from the 1940s and 50s. And that was generally accepted. But because of research, because knowledge is dynamic and ever changing, ever improving, we know that not to be true today. And we need to make sure that our DSPs understand the latest trends and the latest values-based types of trainings that are out there. A lot of DSPs tell us that I haven't been to a training since orientation. And what types of training do we provide? We provide OSHA, corporate compliance, HIPAA, bloodborne pathogens, incident reporting, all very important. Don't get me wrong, but that's core, that's baseline. We need to provide really challenging, dynamic types of training for DSPs if we really want to see outcomes. The second thing is all professions have validated competency areas. That's, you know, obvious. Code of ethics, every profession has a code of ethics. Doctors, lawyers, architects, every profession has a code of ethics. This is where we differ a little bit, because our credentialing programs have never really taken to scale, although they've been around for 10 years. And we are improving them and creating, going to be launching an electronic badge academy relatively soon. But certifications and credentialing for DSPs. There's no way for organizations who want to adopt credentialing for them to pay it. You know, DSPs are going to go through a credentialing program. They're going to earn a credential. They are going to prove their demonstrated skills. And there's no way for organizations to pull down better rates to pay those DSPs. So organizations who do that, God bless them, they're finding the money somehow within their current rate structure. That's got to change. And lastly, every profession has an affiliation with professional membership organization, and professional membership organizations like NADSP provides newsletters and information and policy advocacy and conferences and networking opportunities and all of those things that you're all familiar with. DSPs have these, but nobody's talking about them. Next slide, please. This is everything I know on one screen. From traveling for the last 8 years to, I think, 39 states and working with almost 100,000 direct support professionals. We often talk about this DSP crisis. And my friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Hewitt at the University of Minnesota, she says it's not a crisis at all. It's a systemic failure. A crisis does not last 30 years. And you take a look at the JFK report to President Clinton from 1995, he's saying a lot of the same things we're saying today. And when his uncle, Robert Kennedy, toured Willowbrook State School in 1968, he came out and he had a press conference and he talked about a lack of manpower 50 years ago. So this is not a crisis, ladies and gentlemen. This is a systemic failure for us not investing into developing good quality direct support professionals. We're dependent on the economy. When the economy is is weak, it is good for us because we have jobs. When the economy is poor, it is challenging for us. Turnover has many problems. I've got some recommended reading for you. I'll get into that in a little bit. I do believe that a key to addressing this systemic failure is improving the skills of frontline supervisors. I think that supervisors can make or break a good direct support professional in a matter of one afternoon. And I think that we promote a lot of good direct support professionals into supervisory positions, not because they're going to be good supervisors, but because they're good direct support professionals. And that supervisory job that we're about to promote them into requires a completely different skill set. Many of them fail. We need to develop good supervisors who can, in turn, develop good direct support professionals. Wages are not the only solution. We can raise wages. It may attract people. It will not keep people. It's a more comprehensive approach. DSPs tell us that they're more connected to the people that they support than they are to the people who sign their paychecks. And I think that is good and bad at the same time. I think I've talked to DSPs who sacrifice a lot for the people that they support. And on one hand, that's really, really good. On the other hand, it's kind of unfortunate. We want DSPs who are professional to work with intention. All DSPs use their intuition. Professional DSPs use intention. They can connect their skills back to research and understand that their skills based on research help outcomes, and that should be measured. Next slide, please. Are your DSPs prepared? I'm not even going to get into the settings rule and how DSPs need to help people make decisions, because we make decisions for people all the time. I'd be happy to talk further about that. Next slide, please. Here's a couple of things I really recommend that if you want to get deeper into it. In 2017, we helped write the President's Report, and guess what? This year it was also on the workforce crisis. It's out now. You can Google that. And I also recommend taking a look at the National Core Indicators Staff Stability Survey that came out in January. The data and the trends and the statistics are not good. Next slide, please. I just pulled a couple things here real fast. Nationally, DSPs, this is tenure, who left employment in 2016. 60% of them were employed for less than 1 year. Almost 40% were employed less than 6 months. You can't provide quality services if you've got that kind of turnover. Next slide, please. Average turnover is about 45%. So there's a large range, but think about that. 45%, almost half the people who were hired to support people in 2016 were not around in 2017. And you have to wonder why outcomes are difficult to achieve and safety is difficult to provide when we have a revolving door of strangers in and out of people's lives. Next slide, please. Here's the math. In the United States, 1.27 million direct support professionals. Every time one leaves, it costs about $4,000. That means 774,000 of them leave each year, and that costs Medicaid $2.3 billion. That's roughly $2,000 per direct support professional, or $1 an hour. We got to do something about turnover. Next slide, please. Vacancy rates. We have tired DSPs. We've got a vacancy rates between 4 and 15%. And when we have vacancy rates, we have DSPs working a lot of overtime, and people who work a lot of overtime tend to make mistakes, tend to make more medication errors, tend to say things that they would regret and shouldn't say. And I have to say, as an advocate and as an unapologetic advocate for direct support professionals, it's not their fault. It's the system's fault. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do? There's compensation, there's opportunity, and there's providing support. I do believe this is a comprehensive approach to making this a true profession and to really recognizing DSPs, and stop using empty rhetoric about how important they are and they're the backbone of this industry. We can't say that anymore. We do not have the luxury of saying that after 30 years. The fact is we have not invested in them. And until we do, we will continue to struggle with the high turnover and the low compensation for direct support professionals. And I'm sorry if I sound angry. I'm not scolding anybody, but that is the fact. Next slide, please. We're here to help. These are some of the things that we at NADSP do. We're a membership organization. We provide technical support and technical assistance. We have a curriculum, a train-the-trainer curriculum on helping DSPs understand decision making. We have a train-the-trainer curriculum on developing frontline supervisors, and we can share our code of ethics and our competency areas. And lastly, and Seth has been a big help on this with our marketing, our eBadge Academy, which will be launched later this year. Thank you so much. I know I'm running late and I spoke really, really fast, but I'd be happy to connect with you all later. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Kate. This is Ann and Betsy, and we wish to thank all of you for taking time to join us on the webinar. If you have questions or would like to further discuss any of the agenda items from today, please feel free to be back in touch with us. Also, if you have topics that you'd like to recommend for the next quarter's call, please do so as well. And we look forward to your participation in the third quarter 2018. So we will thank you again for your time. Again, Joe and Kate, thank you very much for your time and expertise on the webinar today. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.